Coming up on this week's show, we'll talk about the end of the Irresistible Omegas series with Nora Phoenix.
This is the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, the show for avid readers and passionate fans of gay romance fiction. Each week, we bring you exclusive author interviews, book recommendations, and explore the latest in gay pop culture.
Welcome to episode 250 of the Big Gay Fiction Podcast. I'm Will, and with me, as always, is my co-host and husband, Mr. Jeff Adams.
Hello, everybody.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by Candlewick Press, publisher of The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, the new YA fantasy novel by Maggie Tokuda-Hall. NPR recently featured this as a book to read this summer, and it's easy to see why from the description. In a world divided by colonialism and threaded with magic, a desperate orphan turned pirate and a rebellious imperial lady find a connection on the high seas. The pirate Florian, born Flora, has always done whatever it takes to survive, including sailing under false flag on the Dove as a marauder, thief, and worse. Lady Evelyn Hasagawa, a highborn imperial daughter, is on board as well, accompanied by her own casket. But Evelyn's one-way voyage to an arranged marriage in the floating islands is interrupted when the captain and crew show their true colors and enslave their wealthy passengers. Both Florian and Evelyn have lived their lives by the rules and whims of others, but when they fall in love, they decide to take fate into their own hands, no matter the cost. Maggie Tokuda-Hall's sweeping fantasy debut, full of stolen memories, illicit mermaid's blood, double agents, and haunting mythical creatures, conjures an extraordinary cast of characters and the unforgettable story of a couple striving to stay together in the face of myriad forces wishing to control their identities and destinies. There is so much here for fantasy lovers: pirates, mermaids, witchcraft, Japanese-inspired cultural and folklore themes, and best of all, two strong, queer, BIPOC protagonists. The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea by Maggie Tokuda-Hall and published by Candlewick Press is available now wherever books are sold. We are so glad that Maggie Tokuda-Hall and Candlewick Press could join us in sponsorship of this very special 250th episode.
It's amazing to think that we have sat across from each other or stood next to each other
Very true.
For 250 weeks now, unbroken, doing this show. I love doing it. Let's do 250 more.
Okay. So not only are we celebrating a special milestone this week, later in the year, we've got something else to celebrate. To commemorate our upcoming 5th anniversary, we're asking you, our loyal and amazingly well-read listeners, to let us know about your favorite episodes from the last 5 years. Now, whether you just discovered us or have been listening since the very beginning, we want to know what you feel are the most unforgettable moments in Big Gay Fiction podcast history. Now, 5 years and over 250 episodes is a lot to consider when narrowing down your favorite. Here's how you do it. Simply go to the submission form at biggayfictionpodcast.com/favorites, and there you will find a link to a list of everyone we have ever had on the show. Pick your favorite and let us know. The most popular interviews will make a return appearance on special episodes leading up to our anniversary in November. Guys, we have never done anything like this, and we're really excited to see what you consider to be the greatest hits from the last 5 years. But to do this, we need you to go and vote. So, go to the submission page at biggayfictionpodcast.com/favorites and let us know.
Can't wait to see what everybody picks. So, before we get into our reviews this week, we've been asking folks to leave us their recommendations over on our Patreon site. And Jamila has recommended to us Interlocking Fragments, which is a series by Sammy C. and Michelle Notaro. Now, Jamila says, Heartstrain is book 1 in the series, and it is so good. I binge read it and cannot stop thinking about these characters. Jameson and Holden take center stage first, and the story just continued from there. This is a true series, and the books interlock. When an author can make you feel for a character who at first appearance seems like a jerk, it's definitely a good read. I highly recommend this and can't wait for Sammy and Michelle to come out with the last book. Now, currently there are 3 books in this series. All of them are available on Amazon Kindle Unlimited. Jamila's got this on my TBR now because, of course, I had to check out the blurbs, find out what these books were about. They look so good. I love, from what I could see, how the characters interlock with each other, and I can't wait to dig into these for myself. I also want to let folks know that Jamila also recommended to us Raylan Richman's Stories of Us series, as well as E. Davies' Significant Brothers, which of course we just talked to Ed about last week in episode 249. Now, if you want to leave us some recommendations, you could do that. We've got a post over on our Patreon page that I will link to in the show notes. You don't have to be a patron to leave a comment there. So we'd love to hear from you and what you're reading and what you would like to add to our TBR list, since we add to yours all the time. And Will's going to actually keep going with Christmas in July now and hopefully add to your TBR even more.
So the first recommendation I have is The Holiday Mix-Up by Avery Ford. For writer Nate, a trip to the Adirondacks the week before Christmas to review a new upscale resort seems like a dream assignment. That is, until a mix-up places him in the honeymoon suite with his arch rival, fellow newspaper columnist Cole. When a snowstorm prevents them from finding other accommodations, they decide to play nice for the duration, and a night spent talking and drinking just a little too much champagne leads to a very sexy encounter on their large, luxurious hotel bed. They spend the rest of their days enjoying the resort amenities like, a relaxing couples massage, and their nights exploring the sizzling chemistry that they can no longer deny. Their assignment at an end, they part ways. Later, in Nate's published review, he speaks of the deep emotional connection he experienced with his unintentional honeymoon suite roommate. And it was more than a fling for Cole as well. He rushes to Nate's office, confesses his true feelings, and takes him on a romantic Christmas carriage ride through Central Park. A happily ever after just in time for Christmas. I really love this enemies to lovers tale, especially the snarky banter between the two heroes early on as they try to navigate the awkwardness of being forced together in such a luxurious romantic setting. Nate and Cole are a super sweet couple that also really know how to bring the holiday heat. And my second recommendation for the week also happens to be by Avery Ford. It's called A Second Chance for Christmas. Blake has spent 2 days driving from LA to visit his family for the holidays. Cooper, Blake's brand new puppy, isn't feeling well after the long car ride, so his first stop in his small Kansas hometown is to the vet, who, as it turns out, is Toby, the boy he left behind all those years ago. Now, there's still a spark between them, even after all these years, and dinner with Blake's family ends with a tender kiss goodnight. The next day, they catch up over lunch, and for the first time ever, Toby takes the day off for some afternoon delight. And the sex is amazing and full of passion, and they're falling in love all over again. But Toby puts on the brakes, declining to spend Christmas with Blake and his parents. And he tells himself that it's the only way to minimize the pain of Blake leaving again. But with the help of Cooper the puppy, Blake tells Toby that he's not throwing away their second chance and he's staying in Kansas. Their Christmas day is spent celebrating with food and family and gifts and ugly holiday sweaters. Blake and Toby end up together as it was always meant to be. Now, both of these stories really hit me in the feels. It's about nice guys being nice and falling in love. So if that is your particular kink, as it is mine, I highly recommend both of these stories by Avery Ford, Second Chance for Christmas and The Holiday Mix-Up.
If you're interested in learning more about the books or anything else we talked about in this week's show, all you have to do is go to the show notes page for this episode at biggayfictionpodcast.com.
I'm Willow Astor, author and host of Living in the Pages, part of the Frolic Podcast Network. My show features best-selling authors and their latest work, but we also cover a crazy range of emotion, from the heartfelt angst of how reality seeps into fiction to the silliness of singing our favorite songs together. I love books and I love writers. It's an extreme thrill for me to chat one-on-one with some of my favorite novelists. I like getting to know them as writers and creative people, and also as real everyday people. Moms and scientists, everyone's interesting in their own way. Some highlights for me have been chatting with Taryn Fisher, Kennedy Ryan, Colleen Hoover, and the absolute dreamy Paulina Simons. Join me every Thursday on your favorite podcast app.
So I was so happy this week to get the chance to talk to Nora Phoenix. Nora has been around in the MM romance game for many years now and has a legion of fans for very good reason, because she writes across so many genres. She's got something out there for just about everybody, and it was wonderful to talk to her about the end of the Irresistible Omegas series. So here's our conversation with Nora. Nora, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Going to talk about all kinds of things today, and we're going to kick it off with the 10th book in the Irresistible Omegas series. It's coming out this Friday, called Omega's Truth. But before we get into that, tell folks who don't know, perhaps, what this series is about.
Yeah, so this is one of those subgenres that people either love or hate, MPreg. I absolutely love it. And what I love about it is that you get to play around with power dynamics. And they've always fascinated me. It's one of the things I absolutely love about writing romance in general, but even more in MPreg, because my world has alphas, betas, and omegas, and you get to play around with the traditional roles and then with non-traditional omegas or with non-traditional alphas. And that has been so much fun, but also very satisfying because you get to challenge basically role patterns just like we see them in society. So in that sense, I've put some messages in that series. It's not just all, fun and games and sexy times, which they have as well. But yeah, it's a combination of world building. It has suspense plot lines, and then they're all poly romances. So all three or more men together, which is also something I love. Because again, it plays with the power dynamics. In a relationship with two, the dynamics are easier, but how do you build a relationship with three people or with four and keep it equal? Those are things that really fascinated me in this series. So it's been a lot of fun to write, but the 10th book will be the last one. So all good things must come to an end.
All good things must come to an end. So it's the grand finale here.
It is. And it's been really challenging because I had a lot of plot points to tie up and a lot of people who needed that final happy end because it's not a romance if it doesn't happy end. And that's the hill I'm dying on. So I wanted to make sure that it was a satisfying ending for all the characters and for the plot lines. So it's been fun to write, but it's also been a challenge this last book to finish it well. The grand finale, it has to satisfy.
What was the inspiration for the series going into it?
Yeah, that's the fun part because this sort of started as a challenge. We were in my Facebook group talking about basically a lack of poly romances with more than three men, so four or more. And kind of like a harem, except those are so often just focused on the sex. And basically my readers challenged me like, Nora, you should write that. And sometimes when people say that, you go like, oh, I'll add it to the list. And for some reason, that one struck me. And I was like, I want to write this, but I want to write it in a way where they need each other. So it's not just four men who happen to be together, but I want them to actually need each other. And that's how I came up with, okay, if I set this in an MPreg world, I can play around with having physical needs, having emotional needs, having the power dynamics. And so I don't want to say it started as a joke, but it definitely started a lot more lighthearted than it turned out to be because over time I've poured my soul into these books. MPreg has a little bit a reputation of being just, fluffy and focused on the sexy times. And often it is. My books they have their sexy times, but they're pretty deep. They have a lot of emotional development and they have a lot of, I think, mirroring issues that you see in our society. I have the MPreg equivalent of non-binary characters or of transgender characters, and that has been incredibly satisfying to show in a completely different world, in a completely different way. And I've heard so much positive feedback from readers is how much this series has meant to them and helped them in their self-discovery. So that's something I'm super grateful for.
It sounds like you're putting into your MPreg world a lot of our real world and then exploring it. How much do you try to keep to, I guess I would say, the realities of our real world while putting it into this alternate universe, if you will?
It is a made-up universe because technically it is not set in the US. It's set in an unnamed country that has a different political system. At the end of the series, there actually is a civil war going on. At the same time, I'm mirroring some of the tensions that we see in our society at the moment. Tensions between the rich and the poor, tensions between, racial tensions, tensions between those in power and those who are abused by that power, and I'm trying to put that in a different way into my books. What I like about it is that you can sort of show it in a different way where people maybe are a little more open to it because it's a fictional world. But some readers don't see the parallels, and that's fine. It's not a sermon. It's not, I'm not preaching. If you just want to read them and you just think they're awesome books, that's fine. But a lot of readers do pick up on those messages, and they tell me how much they appreciate that. So that has been very rewarding for me.
Was it always planned to be 10? Or did you just at some point know, 10 is going to be it?
It was planned as 3. That was my idea. I had the original 4 characters, and then I had one side character, which I figured, he's going to get his own story, and that would be it. But the series just went from there, and it did well in sales, which also helps, because if it doesn't do well, then you have to make the financial consideration. Is it worth pursuing this or not? But I just had so much fun with the series, so much fun writing it, and the feedback was so awesome. And I just kept developing new characters that needed a story. Even now, my readers are like, Nora, you need to write a spin-off because we still have like 10 characters who we haven't had the story for. And I'm like, oh God, please. But yeah.
That's incredible. So, I guess with that, I have to ask, how did you go from plotting a trilogy into 7 more books? Because it sounds like, obviously there's a lot of stuff going on in here.
There is, yeah. The bigger plot is something I enjoy immensely. So I did plot out a bigger, basically a thriller plot with there's a medical plot, there's a corruption plot, there's police corruption, there's a government, there's an overthrow of a government, there's a coup, there's a military coup, there's a civil war. That part I had planned it on a much smaller scale, but when the series grew, I was like, okay, I get to develop this further. And again, I'm playing around with the question, if people do something bad, but they do it with the right motivation to ultimately achieve a good goal, does that make it okay? If you use bad methods, but what you ultimately achieve is good, does that make it okay? Which is a moral question that keeps popping up in this series, which I like to play around with.
That sounds way fun to write, much less to read.
It is. It is incredibly fun to write. Like I said, I get to put so much in it, political stuff and emotional stuff and psychological development and just a lot of stuff that I'm thinking about myself. Writing really is the best therapy. I keep saying it. Like, I get paid to go to therapy. If I don't write, I think my head would be a lot less peaceful. I just process a lot of what's going on in my life and in the world through my writing. So it's been very healthy for me.
Now let's talk about Omega's Truth a little bit. As you're wrapping up, what do readers have to look forward to here besides wrapping up all these various plot points?
I think the big question that fans of the series will have after reading the last couple of books is there's a general who's behind the overthrow of the government, who's behind the military coup. So far, the evidence suggests that he has a plan for our men, for our ranch, for our pack. But what is that plan? Will he ultimately prove to be good or evil? I think that's the question, aside from the romances that a lot of readers are worrying about, like, how is this going to play out? So all I can say and all I can promise is it has a happy ending. I do not do bad endings. I promise. It's
the Nora Phoenix guarantee.
Oh my gosh. There's few things that I hate more than going into a book or a movie or anything or a TV series and being promised a happy end or expecting a happy end and it's not happening. That is like such a disillusion and such a disappointment that can take away my joy for days.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason I write and read romance. I love the happy ends. That's what I do it for. So yeah. So wonderful happy ends for our three characters and for all of them, really. But how? That's the question.
You mentioned that there have been fans who've talked about spinoffs. Can you envision a spinoff out of this eventually?
Yes. So there's one main pack, and in the previous books we had a second pack form basically split off because they became too big. I do hope to write that spin-off in the future. It won't be this year. I have a different series planned for this year, but in the future, I do hope to pick up the storyline from that second pack, maybe make a little jump into the future and see what happens. I've had some suggestions from readers as well for characters and for storylines they'd like to see, so we'll see what happens. The plans are there, but you know how it is. So many stories to write, not enough time. So choices will have to be made. Yeah.
Now you write in several genres. Impreg is just one of them. Do you have a favorite out of all of them? The thing that you just keep coming back to?
Not really. I like that I write different genres, and I hope to actually write even more. The only paranormal, and I always debate whether or not you can call Impreg paranormal. It's kind of like, is it really? I don't know. I would hope to write something paranormal, maybe angels or vampires. I think that would be a lot of fun. So I just like exploring different genres because they give you different opportunities to try new things. I've written some sci-fi with aliens, which was commercially not the biggest success, putting it mildly, but so rewarding to write is that you have to give yourself those projects as well and just say, for the hell of it, I'm just going to write it because it's fun and because it's rewarding for me. And if it doesn't sell, well, then it doesn't sell, whatever. Yeah. And
it is kind of surprising you haven't done paranormal yet, given all the other things that you've done.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done quite a bit. I think the biggest reason so far has been that I had so many series started is that I wanted to finish things first. So I promised myself I need to finish this Impreg series before I start anything else, because otherwise, and I finished my sci-fi series earlier this year as well, otherwise you run the risk of endangering the relationship you have with readers and the trust they place in you that you will finish a series. It was already a year between the first book and book 2 and 3 of my sci-fi series, which was not intentional, but that's a long time to wait for a sequel, which I'm sure contributed to the poor sales results. But I learned from that is like, if you commit yourself to a series, you have to finish it. You can't start just new series and have 5 series, 6 series at the same time. Readers want that series to finish at some point. So I'm finishing up series and then I can start something new. So we'll see where that leads me.
And it's great that you finished the sci-fi series, even though you knew it wasn't selling well, because we certainly see authors, for good reasons of their own, that they don't finish because something doesn't gel right in the sales figures.
Yeah. I would never judge someone for that, because if you are dependent on that income, not everybody can afford to have a hobby project the way that I could with this. I was fortunate enough that I didn't need that particular income. I could afford to write the 2 more books, but not everybody can. And I totally understand that. I would never judge an author for abandoning a series because it doesn't sell. That's, I think, a very valid judgment call to make.
Absolutely.
Is, look, if it doesn't sell, fun projects, as rewarding as they are, don't pay the mortgage. So, there's that.
Yeah. From a trope perspective, you're all over the place there too, but do you have certain favorites that you always want to come back to?
I think by now Daddy Kink is pretty established. My whole Perfect Hand series is nothing but
I would say so.
Yeah. Again, and I think that's something that keeps showing up in my books is, again, it's the power dynamics that fascinate me. Is when you have a dom and a sub, or a daddy and a boy, it's so easy to assume that the daddy is in charge or the dom is in charge. But when you do it the right way, it's the sub. Like everything centers around that submissive, around that boy, and a daddy who would insist on being in charge and making all decisions for the wrong reasons is not a good daddy. And that's the kind of dynamics I love to play with, as well as just because you're a daddy doesn't mean that you top, or just because you're a daddy doesn't mean that you're older. So I play around again with those dynamics as well. I have a book where the daddy is younger than his boy. I have a book where the daddy bottoms for one of his boys. I like those dynamics. I love playing around with them and just showing people is that at the core, it's not about that. It's not about, oh, you're older or bigger, so you're in charge. It's what you need, what you crave, and what somebody else brings to the table and needs and craves from you. It's that relationship together. I love that. That to me is romance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did the power dynamic come to be kind of the thing for you? What is it about that intrigues you to mess around with your characters?
I think it's because, look, I started reading romance when I was a teenager, and we're talking about probably, I must have been 12 or 13 when I swiped my mom's romances first. Obviously I wasn't allowed to read them, so I did it in secret, but, she loved her category romances, and I loved them. There's a reason I picked Nora as my first name for my pen name, because Nora Roberts is like my hero. I started reading her books when I was a teenager. I absolutely love her books. But at some point, I grew a little tired of male-female romance because of the power dynamics. They bothered me because too often it was assumed that the man had the power over the woman, and I don't like that. That to me was degrading in a way, and certain books made that very clear, where to me they definitely crossed the line into, okay, this is not consensual here, this is not informed consent, you're doing things which in itself is fine, but then you have to call it dark romance. Mm-hmm. If that's what you want to write, that's fine, but then you have to label it as such. But if you sell a romance as, okay, this is a romance, but it has that non-consensual element, that bothers me a lot. And out of that, I stumbled across the gay romance genre and discovered that, I get to play around with those power dynamics here. I've written male-female romance, never published. I've written young adult. And even in those books that have never been published, you can see me trying to play with those power dynamics, but your options are so much more limited. So when I started playing and writing romance, that was, I think, instinctively the theme, like, this is why I want to write this. This is what fascinates me. So I think I come at romance from probably a psychological viewpoint. That's what fascinates me. I read a lot of psychological books and still, there's so much to learn about people. So that fascinates me. Yeah.
I have to say, I would love to read a Nora Phoenix YA book.
Yeah.
If you ever want to come around, decide to put one of those out.
Oh my gosh, I have the perfect covers sitting in my way too big stack of unused covers I bought. My God. It's like, I'm the worst. I'm an addict. Like, my name is Nora and I'm an addict. I buy pre-made covers. It's bad. But I have 2 covers that would be absolutely perfect for YA. So somewhere in the back of my head, I do have an idea. So
someday,
who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
What do you think the trademark of a Nora Phoenix book is, regardless of its genre or trope?
When I started writing, I thought it was, okay, one of my trademarks is high steam, is the heat level, because I loved the sex scenes. I love writing them. They fascinate me. And then as I wrote more books, I discovered that wasn't it. As much as I love them, they have to really fit the characters. And one of my last releases, Healing Hand, features a demisexual character and a character who probably identifies as asexual, but based on trauma. That was such an amazing book to write. It has no penetrative sex whatsoever, nothing. There's, a hand job, or that's it. And yet it's I think in terms of writing, I consider it one of my best books. And it was an eye-opener for me because you can't hide behind sex scenes. You have to write the romance without the sex, which was a challenge, but I loved it. I really loved it. So before I would have said, oh, it's the high heat. Now I think is what characterizes my books is I think depth. I think I write three-dimensional characters who feel very real. My books always are a little different. I turn tropes around, I turn dynamics around, I introduce just little things that are different, and I write non-typical characters. They're not standard variety for the most part. Some have limitations. I've written a character with a severe stutter. I've written a character who's had an amputation. And I would love to write many more diverse characters for sure. So I think I would say the depth and the emotional development in my books, I think that's very characteristic for what I write. Mm-hmm. At least that's also what readers tell me. So,
with the diverse characters, there's so much conversation these days about proper representation of diverse characters. What do you do to help make sure that proper representation exists with everything that you're writing?
For me, it's a very loaded question. Because I didn't grow up in America, I'm Dutch. I've only lived here since 2013, so not even 7 years. I don't feel comfortable taking a position specifically on books that are set in the U.S. when it comes to diverse characters because I don't share the history of cultural diversity in this country. I'm learning a lot. I'm reading a ton. I have a degree in history with a specialization in U.S. history, but that's book knowledge. So for me, at this moment, I would not feel comfortable writing a character of color, whether as specifically as a main character. Also because I'm trying to follow the lead of authors of color in this. And what I hear most of the time right now is that they want white authors like me to introduce characters of color as side characters, as secondary characters, but not as main characters, and leave that main character for authors of colors to give them a chance. And I think at this point, I'm following that lead. I think that's fair. I don't judge anybody who makes a different stand. I think it's a very personal choice that you have to make. But as I said, being not American, I'm just super careful in being culturally sensitive here because I didn't grow up with a lot of the social cues that Americans did. So I miss out on some things. So I have to be very careful there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And pivoting on something else you said, because I would be remiss not to ask this, since you talked about the steamy factor of some of the books. What's it like managing 3-4 bodies potentially in a sex scene? Because as an author, my mind just baffles at how to deal with that and not having enough pronouns to go around necessarily.
Yes. The biggest downside of writing sex scenes that have more than 2 characters, I mean, you already have the problem with 2 men because you can't use he and him. But when you have more men, you have to use their names. And some authors say they come up with descriptions for the younger man or the older man but if you are true to your point of view, you wouldn't say that. Like, if there is an age difference, between me and my partner, I wouldn't think of him, of her. I'm single, but I wouldn't think of him, of her as, oh, the older man or the older woman. Like, for me, that's a weird thing. I would think of that person as him or her or them or by their name. So that's what I'm trying to do in a lot of the scenes is just use their name. In MPreg, you have it a little easier because you can use alpha, beta, and omega, which identifies the characters. So you get to cheat a little there because it is natural for us to think in terms of genders, which alpha, beta, omega are not, but let's consider them genders right now. We think of people as a man or a woman or, not to be binary, but that's how our minds still work. But when you have 4 men in a scene, it's a lot of body parts to keep track of.
It is. There's a lot of things going on there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
not brave enough to do that.
I sometimes do drawings. I've been known to, and I say this, it's not a joke, but I've been known to watch porn scenes with multiple men just to figure out how they do that, which is purely research. I laugh because I'm asexual. Like, the porn in itself really doesn't do anything for me, but it does help me figure out, like, how would this work? Like, what can you do with bodies? What is physically possible? Yeah. And still, my editor sometimes says, honey, if he's like this, he can't reach that. And I'll be like, okay, you got a point there.
Yeah,
so
there's got to be realistic choreography in there.
Somewhere, yeah.
Now, you co-write also with KM Neuhold.
Yeah.
How did you and KM come together to form a partnership that's now gone on for many books?
Yeah, that's a funny story, because before I had written my first book, I was a reviewer. I had a blog, and one of the books I reviewed was one of KM's earlier books, which I absolutely loved. So I had published a review, and I just messaged her on Facebook, like, okay, I reviewed your book, and if you want to, read the review, it's, I loved it. Here's the link. And she wrote back like, oh, thank you. And she was, like, that's amazing. And we started chatting, and I told her that I was a upcoming author, that I had a book coming out in October. And she's like, well, if you need someone to beta read for me, I'd love that. And I was like, wow, look. She at the time had already hit #1 with one of her books. And I was like, oh my God, so we just hit it off. She read No Filter, which was the first book I released. She absolutely loved it. She helped me start my Facebook group and boosted it. I had 300 people within the first week because she posted it in her group. So she's been super supportive, helping me. And I think I had 2 or 3 books out, which she absolutely loved, when someone in her reader group posted, I think it was like a real story or about 2 porn stars who had fallen in love. And they said, oh, this is a plot bunny. And Kylene responded with, oh, this sounds amazing. And I had responded at the same time. And then some readers said, oh, you should write it together. And I thought, well, that's a joke. And then Kylene responded with, oh, I would love that. And I was like, oh, she's kidding. It's the polite thing to say.
Right.
But then she messaged me and she was like, are you really interested? And I was like, hell yeah, where do I sign? So that's how we started writing together. And the fun part is that we never spoke on the phone, and we have never seen each other until we had released 3 books already. We did everything over Messenger and Facebook, and it's just neither of us are phone people. And we met for the first time at GRL in Virginia. That was the first time we met. So yeah, fun story. But we still love writing together. We mesh really well. Our styles mesh well. We have the same approach to writing. So it's just been a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. I always love hearing how collaborations begin, and then when they're able to keep going as well. And that you guys seem to have so much fun with it.
We do. And, we get along great. And the fun thing is that our joint books are a different style for both of us, because they're relatively light for me, but that makes them fun to write. They're a nice diversion from my usual work, and it's the same for her. So we're just having fun with them. Yeah.
Who ends up coming up with the plots? Or is it kind of like, I have this idea and now I have this idea, and they just go from there?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. So we'll go on Messenger in the morning when it's a writing day for us, and we'll go like, okay, what scenes do we want to write? And then Kylene goes, oh, I have this idea. What if he goes to his father and then this and this happens? And I'll be like, oh, that's awesome. And I'll be like, okay, so I was thinking, what if in his background he had a bad breakup, and that's why? And she's like, oh, that sounds good. And then we start writing. And we each pick a point of view. And so far, we don't plot extensively at all. So far, in the 7 books that we have written together, plus a couple of novellas, we've only had it once that we have written the same scene without realizing it, once. And it
That's
was a
amazing.
scene that was relatively easy because it turned out to be a sex scene that was relatively easy to turn into, oh, we can use that later on in the book. But that's the only time that had ever happened. And it's just, yeah, our writing chemistry is just really good. I love it. It's very easy.
That's fantastic. How did you get started in romance? You talked about being a reader from being a teenager. What made you, put pen to paper or hands on keyboard if you prefer?
I started with pen and paper. I wrote my first book when I was 14. I still have it. It's an adorably naive romance, teens, and it's just lovely. It's set in high school, and if I read it now, I still get the fuzzies because it's so cute and sweet. And I have kept writing ever since, but my challenge was that I needed to transition from writing in Dutch to writing in English. And that took me a couple of years to get to a command of the English language where I was comfortable enough to write in, and then practice enough where I had the self-confidence to publish, which, as you know, is scary as hell.
Mm-hmm.
So I have probably written, I want to say about 20 books before I ever published my first, and most of those are male-female romances and YA. But when I read romance, I was like, okay, this is my genre. I connect with the genre. This is what I want to write. At that time, I still identified as straight. I was still married. My husband came out as gay, so we had that was parallel, which in hindsight is amazing if you think about it. Mm-hmm. Romance helped me identify that my husband was gay. He knew, but we hadn't had that conversation yet. And for me, it was very fitting that I would write in that genre. So we got a divorce. We're still, we co-parent. We're great friends. He has a boyfriend. I'm super happy for him. But writing romance also helped me in my own journey come to, okay, this is the labels that I'm comfortable with. I am asexual. Okay, this fits me. I am pan-romantic. This is what fits me. And that's been a wonderful journey where writing romance definitely has helped me. So I'm super grateful to be in this genre. And I every time I get a message from a reader that my books have helped them identify who they are, it just makes me so grateful.
That's awesome. I love those stories where just writing the genre and reading the genre has such a impact to life in general.
It really does. And it's one of the reasons why it bothers me when people are very dismissive about the genre. They characterize it, especially when it's written by women, as fetishizing gay men, which you may have a point for some of the subgenres on some of the books. I'm not denying that. But to paint the whole genre with that brush, to me, is not, I don't think you do full justice to the impact that these books have on the people who read them and on the people who write them. Aside from the fact that to say that most of the women who write gay romance are cis straight women is absolutely not true. Even if they, maybe publicly identify as straight, that doesn't mean they are. I identified as straight for a long time. Turns out I'm not. Everybody comes out at their own pace, at their own timing, and some may never have the safety to do so. It's all good. So let's not judge people by the label that we have to carry to the outside world. Mm-hmm. I'm not out publicly to a lot of people because I have my personal life and my writing life separate. I kind of have that luxury. And for some people, it's not smart to come out, and I respect that. So yeah, little tangent there.
No, good tangent though. Do you remember what your gateway book to was from a reading standpoint?
Yes, J.R. Ward, the Black Dagger Brotherhood series. I don't know if you've ever read it.
I have not, but I've heard a lot of people comment about that series.
It's set in the part of New York where I live, which is, part of the fun. And it's male MF romance for the most part. It's vampires. It's super sexy. It's hot. It's violent. It's got a bigger plot. It's just everything I love about books is in that series. Again, power dynamics. She plays with those. And then all of a sudden, she introduced an couple. And she she kind of hinted at their story in the previous books. And I, coming from, you're going to laugh at this, but originally a very conservative evangelical background, I was like, I'm not sure if I want to read a male-male romance. Like, I'm not sure I'm going to like that. And I read that book and I was like, holy shit, I didn't know this was a thing. And I went on Amazon and I went down the rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole was deep and wide. And yeah, that one book, I wrote her a thank you letter. I really did. Because I think it's absolutely amazing and courageous that an author of her stature or of her fame took such a gamble in publishing an MM romance in the midst of an MF series. And I know she had to compromise. It wasn't the story that she really wanted to tell. Her publishers, put a lot of pressure on her, as I later found out, to, lower the number of sex scenes and to change some things. But the fact that she still did it, I think it was incredibly brave and courageous. And without that book, I'm not sure when I would have found the genre. So, yeah. Lots of gratitude there.
Wow, that's very cool. And speaking of books, what's the last book you read that you're really wild about?
Oh my gosh, I've been on a good reading streak lately. I've blazed my way through May Archer's Backlist, which I absolutely loved. Her last book, Off Plan, it's set in Florida on a key, is absolutely phenomenal. I can't wait to read her last release with Lucy Lennox, which should be really good. I have the privilege of beta reading for Kylene, who has a new book just released, Hardwood, which was absolutely phenomenal. That series is so much fun.
Will loves that series.
It is, a lot of people, I think, with everything that has happened, need a lighter and fluffier read, and that series just delivers. It's fun, it's sexy, it's not too heavy, and I think she did a phenomenal job with that. Other than that, I reread the whole His Boy Next Door series. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's BSDM, but not daddy, dom, sub, sometimes a little daddy vibe. It's so good. So good. So many books, not enough time.
So now that Irresistible Omegas is done, what do we have to look forward to in the rest of 2020 from you?
I have a new series planned that I can't say too much about yet, but it's a contemporary series with a suspense element that I think readers are really going to love. I had originally planned to release it earlier in the year, but with the coronavirus hitting, I thought it wasn't the right timing for this. And in hindsight, I'm glad I waited just a little. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is one of the few series I've really plotted. I've done a lot of research for. I plotted this, so I'm super excited to share with my readers what's coming. But I can't say too much yet. Don't want to spoil the surprise.
Yeah, gotta keep people guessing there a little bit.
Right?
Very cool. Well, Nora, what's the best way for everyone to keep up with you online?
Facebook is basically my second home, so that's the best way to hang out with me. My Facebook group is called Nora's Nook. We have almost 4,000 members by now, and it's my happy place. My readers there, I call them my nookies, which is, a little wink, wink there. They're amazing, and it's a very warm and supportive place where, we talk about books, but also about life, where people get to share what's on their minds and seek support, and we have fun, take over. So that's like I said, it's really my happy place. I'm on Twitter, but I do warn that is a very political.
It's true for everybody these days on Twitter.
Yes, I am unapologetically political on Twitter. So if that's not your thing, just don't follow me, because I think it's important to speak up. I don't think that art and politics are separated, so I speak up a lot there. If that's not your thing, then you may want to skip that. I'm on Instagram as Nora Phoenix. I have a Patreon where you can check me out. That's about it, I guess. Oh, my newsletter. Yes, the weekly deals. How can I forget? NoraLinks.com, which is every Saturday I release new weekly deals, the best new releases in gay romance, and 99-cent deals and freebies. So NoraLinks.com every Saturday, and that's stacking that TBR pile for a bargain. That was the sales pitch.
Well, Nora, it's been so awesome talking to you. I'm glad you came to the podcast to tell us all about these good things.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I always enjoy talking to you.
This week's interview transcript has been brought to you by our community on Patreon. If you'd like to read the author interview for yourself, simply head on over to the show notes page for this episode at biggayfictionpodcast.com.
Thanks again to Nora for talking to us about the wrap-up of that series, teasing us just the teeniest tiny little bit about what's coming next, and talking to us also about her collaborations with K.M. Neuhold. It was a really delightful conversation.
All right, guys, I think that'll do it for this very special 250th edition of the Big Gay Fiction Podcast. Coming up next week, L.C. Rosen joins us to talk about his young adult book, Camp.
I adored this book so much. I'll have a full review for it next week. This book is even being made into a movie for HBO Max, so we'll be talking to LC about the movie version as well.
Remember, no matter where life takes you, the journey will always be sweeter when you have a book. Until next time, everyone, please stay strong, be safe, and above all else, keep turning those pages and keep reading.
Big Gay Fiction Podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. You can find more shows you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. New episodes of this show are available every Monday wherever you get your podcasts. You can help support this show with a monthly pledge through Patreon. For more information about joining our community and the bonus content we deliver, check out patreon.com/biggayfictionpodcast. I'm Kurt Graves. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.